conducted the city survey. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Tony.
Thank you, City Manager Miyake, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members. It's nice to be here this evening to talk about performance. We had a total of 511 respondents respond to our survey this year. It was open during the month of March and April. It comes to us with a margin of error of 4.3% at a 95% confidence level. And what that means is if we went out and randomly found 10 residents, 95% of the time, the results we would find would be 4.3%, similar to what you would see in tonight's results. So it's nice to be here this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Wiggin, who will spend some time and go through each of our measures with you.
Thank you, Nathan Wiggin. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you guys about the performance measures results. I will try to be brief, as the overall picture is fairly positive and fairly consistent with what we've seen in previous years. To begin, we asked a question of residents asking them to rate the overall quality of life in Bellevue. And as you can see, about 94% of residents believe that the overall quality of life meets or exceeds their expectations. And you can look at this historically and see that it's been pretty smooth and pretty much the same for the entire time. One of the other key questions that we discuss involves the quality of services provided by the city. And we basically say, how would you rate the overall quality of services provided by the city of Bellevue? And as you can see, this rates quite highly as well, with 92% of residents saying that this meets or exceeds their expectations. And if you go back and trend this all the way back to 2012 or before, you can see that this is also fairly consistent over several years. The next slide is one that has had a little bit of movement, and it's an interesting storyline. We asked residents whether they feel they're getting their money's worth out of the city tax dollar. You'll see that from the high of 2014, we have seen a slight decline. There are no statistically significant changes when looking at this year over year. So we are still within the margin of error of what we saw in 2016 and 2015 and 2013 and 2012. You'll see a little bump in 2014, and there's actually a little tidbit on that on the next slide that's a little more interesting about it. Another thing to note is that in cities and communities and towns everywhere that we do this study and ask this question, this particular question does get lower ratings than all of the other key high-level 5-star questions that we ask. Essentially, it's just people, they always want more for the money, is how we kind of view it. Moving on to the next slide, this is a question that asks residents if they feel that the city is headed in the right or wrong direction. And you can see that about 3/4 of the residents believe that Bellevue is headed in the right direction. And you'll see that it's relatively steady compared to previous years, but it has come down compared to 2014. And that little tidbit I was referring to was in 2014, this survey was hosted at the end of January / beginning of February. And as my new clients in Denver understand, that was a good time for this area. If you look at things historically, you'll see almost everything bumped up a little bit in 2014, and we're calling it jokingly the Super Bowl effect. So when you're looking at these things, kind of take 2014 with a grain of salt. And when you do that, you see that we're actually pretty steady going back to 2012. We also provided at the bottom just a couple of high-level comments. We asked an open-ended question: why is the city headed in the right direction? Why is the city headed in the wrong direction? The grain of salt that I would use when looking at this is only 54 people provided answers for why the city is headed in the wrong direction. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at these results.
So before we move on, I would bring to Council's attention that Council's taken several actions in the last year to actually address some of the issues in the wrong direction. So the TIFIA loan that has recently closed is going to help with congestion in the Bell Red area. The levee projects that you've been speaking about this evening is going to help with neighborhood congestion. And then again, you actually have done an affordable housing plan recently as well. So there's been several actions taken to help in the wrong direction.
Going to our final 2 slides, we asked residents overall how would they describe the city of Bellevue as a place to live. And you really can't say much about this. Yeah, sure, it's moved down to 98 to 97%. That's still positive in an incredible way. And then the final finding that we have here is we say, overall, how would you describe your neighborhood as a place to live? And this is another situation where things have been holding high and steady for several years, where 94% of residents say that they live in a good or excellent neighborhood. That's just a very high-level overview of what we have going on and what we can do.
That's our presentation for this evening. Again, the full performance measures report will be online by the end of July, and we'll take any questions if you have any.
Any questions? Ernie?
So you mentioned 54 people commented it's going in the wrong direction, or at least commented what is going in the wrong direction. That's a little over 10% of the total people surveyed, correct?
Correct. There's about 11 or so percent said either wrong or somewhat wrong direction.
So from a trend standpoint, is that number getting bigger or smaller or staying the same?
I can't tell you right off the top of my head, but it seems, just looking at it, to be fairly relatively consistent. I was noting as I was reading it that what I didn't mention is the divisiveness of that question is less here than I have seen in several other cities that we've been doing it. So in a couple of examples of other communities where we'll have about 15, 20, 25% of the residents say wrong direction, about 30 or 40% of residents say right direction, and the rest are kind of in the middle. So what we're seeing is an overall consensus with Bellevue that is not seen as often amongst other communities and towns.
And then the second question is the 4.3 and the 95% confidence, is that what you're targeting for, or would you normally be shooting for a lower margin or a higher confidence, or is this the normal?
This is pretty much the norm, is right around there. It's, to get much greater confidence involves surveying several, almost exponentially more people.
Just a real brief comment. We were all congratulating Dan Stroh prior to this. I know there's a lot of very familiar faces in City Hall here who have seen his work. If you want to know why we appreciate him so much, this slide is really important. Why is it going in the right direction? The number one reason, development and growth. Why is it going in the wrong direction? The number one reason, development and growth. That is a tough job. I find that interesting, and I think from your comment, I think you generally find in these that the concept of development and growth, especially in the Pacific Northwest, is more seen as a negative than necessarily as a positive. And this is, I think, one of the rare cities where I think that where it comes up to be a little bit of both. But maybe if you could talk a little bit about what you see in other cities when you do this. Do you see that? And especially I'm talking Pacific Northwest. If you're talking some other areas of the country, I'm sure development and growth is much more sought after.
So in the Pacific Northwest specifically, one of the things that we see pop up quite often is actually affordability of housing. In other areas across the country, we're seeing development and growth showing up quite a bit as a negative attitude. So instead of 11 people, basically those two comments make the numbers, and of 45 and 11 would be reversed in most other cities.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have one other item, and that is, it's just really a report on the celebration for the first neighborhood safety, connectivity, and congestion levy project. There was a celebration that occurred last Thursday on July 6th, where the community celebrated the completion of a sidewalk improvement in the Chevy Chase neighborhood. Those in attendance were very appreciative of the work done, and this is the first project coming out of the levy that was approved in November by the voters. And I wanted to hand this over to Dave Berg, our transportation director, to just talk a little bit about the project and the celebration, many of which a number of council members were there to celebrate this project. Dave?
Great, thank you, Mr. Miyake, and good evening, Mayor Stokes, City Council. Yeah, as Mr. Miyake mentioned, But a little over a week and a half ago, we did a little celebration out in the Chevy Chase neighborhood, attended by numerous residents out there, as well as Mayor Stokes, Councilmember Robinson, and Councilmember Lee. The focus of the celebration, you can see here, the new sidewalk segment. Well, this was just the first phase. We completed the entire Chevy Chase neighborhood, but this was just the first phase of the levy-funded project that's going to replace about 1 3/4 miles of sidewalks in the crossroads area. Sidewalks, the tree roots are uneven due to erosion, so creating a much safer, walkable area within the neighborhoods out in the crossroads area. We had a commemorative sign there. We also had the Chase Community Club Executive Board member Judy Miller came and expressed appreciation to the city and City Council for focusing on safe walking conditions within the neighborhoods. And then we unveiled this sign, it's hard to see in the shadow there, but a commemorative sign that was quite fun to see as opposed to a ribbon cutting, you know, for a sidewalk that gets you to a sign. And we're going to leave that sign out there in the neighborhood for a little bit just so they can see that it was a pretty good effort that both the city and the residents had to go through during the construction phase. So, like I mentioned, this was the first phase within that area. I do want to talk about, though, kind of upcoming levy projects, and this is kind of the sign we will be using, much like you see many signs out there today. This is going to be a yard-mounted type of sign. As we go out to construction, be able to know this project is funded through levy proceeds. There's a number of projects coming up. One of them was mentioned just previously, the design of the congestion relief projects out in the Eastgate area, 150th and Southeast 37th and Newport Way. We've got a number of pedestrian safety projects in the Lake Hills area, especially some major trail crossings of the Lake to Lake Trail, both on Main Street out on Lake Hills Boulevard. Some bike facilities that are going in around the city as part of our bicycle route implementation program in conjunction with the overlay programs. We're just restriping the roadway at the same time. But I also want to highlight on your consent agenda tonight, you will see 3 projects, 3 consent items, item 8B, 8H, and 8J. All projects that are leveraging levy funds to acquire grant funds. So all total, those 3 projects, we're expending $235,000 of levy funds, and we've been able to leverage that to $1.4 million in grant funds. So a pretty significant return there. And that's one of the advantages of having the levy to be able to address the backlog of projects when these opportunities arise. So just wanted to report out on that, and if the council has any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Well, I wanted to say I really thank you for bringing this out and for the public, and you know, the council, when we decided to do this, to go out with the levy, and it was, you know, strongly supported, but one of the promises we made, one of the things we wanted to do was get out there and get it going fast. And that takes cooperation, staff and everybody to do that. The projects are there, and like you said, we didn't want to have this go and just be there for a while and finally get around to it. So getting out and doing these smaller pieces right now, and it's going to, you know, in the long run, it's going to be quite a bit. But that's exciting, particularly in the Eastgate area, getting that going. That's one that's been languishing for a long time. And I remember on the Eastgate Citizen Advisory Committee, that one of the things we were frustrated about was the fact that we couldn't really work on those areas. Part of it is because of the annexation and King County part, and then because of WashDOT. But I think that's, again, something we're improving on, is getting those in place before other things come on. So have to really, you know, we just said we want it done, but the staff's what made it done. And we really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, we have one other positive news about events going on in the community tonight. And this is good for the council, and something we're very proud of an individual. As many of you may have seen, there was a little magazine called the 425 Business Magazine, Bellevue, and it has leaders, 6 women, risk-taking women, making their marks on the East Side. We had an entrepreneur, a programmer, a chocolatier, and a change maker and a philanthropist, and our own Jennifer Robertson. Stand up. This is her picture, and then inside there's the whole article. So if you haven't seen this, get it and see this. It's a great article, and we're very, very proud of our council member. And yes. And she's listed as a politician, but she's more than that. But she's a politician. When you think about politicians, it's in the good sense. Politicians get a bad name all the time, but Jennifer's a collaborator, and we've enjoyed. We don't agree on certain things. We agree on things. We all do, and she's in there and really focused. And no wonder she got put in this leadership group. So. Again, thank you very much for what you do, and we're really proud of you.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't expect you to raise this up, but yeah, it was quite a bit. I have 3 teenage daughters, and the fact that their mom's now a cover girl is kind of not in the fashion sense, but anyway, yeah, it's kind of a fun thing. My mom needed a coffee, so I appreciate you giving me an extra. So thank you. Let's go move on.
All right. Didn't mean to embarrass you too much.
I think I'm a little pink.
All right, we'll do the consent calendar. Next item 8. Is a motion to approve the items?
I will move to approve the consent calendar.
And I'll second, but can I ask
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to ask the city manager to address we had someone comment on the parking zone. So either before or after we vote, or maybe before we vote, if we could get someone to explain that and what the outreach is going to be, because the ordinance just says that the parking zone will take effect when the signs are up, and the agenda memo says the signs will go up after we decide, with outreach that they're needed. So it is, I agree with the speaker that it is a little vague, and we don't know when they're going to be up. So, or if they're going to be up. So could someone address that, please?
I actually, I cannot, and I don't think the staff here tonight or here, the staff that did the agenda memo are here tonight. So either we can bring something back after to report on it as some kind of management review to address the concern that was raised by what we heard in the under oral communications.
Okay. Notice the date came out from.
Well, I just want to echo what the city manager said. We can have Karen Gonzalez from our neighborhood traffic safety services group address this and provide some information.
Great. Okay.
Maybe we could just get something written. It isn't written in our next packet of what the public outreach plan is, how these have been used in the past, what the timing typically is. That would hopefully, and make sure that we connect with the person who spoke.
Absolutely.
I think that would be really good, and then I'm happy to vote. Thanks.
Okay, it's almost 9 o'clock. The next on the agenda is the public hearing. I'm sorry, we do have to vote on this. I'm trying to rush this through. Okay. All right, motion been made second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
No. No no's. The motion carries, and the consent agenda is passed. And we will get that information back. Okay.
Mayor Stokes going to be dialing in Councilmember Robinson right now, so pardon my noise. Go ahead.
Okay. The public hearing is on a land use code, LUC amendment, or LUC as we call them, that would remove the quasi-judicial appeals to the City Council in Process 1 and Process 3 land use matters. The 5 steps of the public hearing are outlined on tonight's agenda, and we'll begin with the staff report. After the staff presentation, Lynn?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we're just starting. After the staff presentation, the council will open the hearing, and any member of the public may address the council at that time. Speakers will be recognized by Deputy Mayor Chumanak in order that their names appear on the sign-up sheet that's out on the table below. Any person testifying before the council who have not signed up may testify after those who are on the sign-in sheet have been heard. There's no limit on the number of speakers who may testify. The council may ask questions of any speaker. The city clerk will be the timekeeper, and your testimony is being recorded. And again, the same rules on the timing, and please be courteous because we want to get as many people having an opportunity to speak at 3 minutes, and when the red light comes on, just stop at that point, please. We want to have as much participation as we can, and all speakers are equal. At the conclusion of testimony, we will close the hearing and council may discuss next steps. As noted in the agenda memo, no action is anticipated tonight, but staff are seeking direction on bringing forward legislation at a later date. City Manager, you want to please introduce those who are here tonight?
Sure, Mayor. We have joining us this evening with a brief staff reporter, Matt McFarland, the Assistant City Attorney, as well as Carolyn Helen, the Code and Policy Director. With that, I'll turn it over to you folks for a brief staff report before opening up the public hearing.
Oh, thank you so much, City Manager Miyake. Good evening, council members, Mayor Stokes. We're here going to do a brief presentation because we know the meat of the conversation is to hear from the public this evening. Tonight, our meeting objectives will be to hold a public hearing, and we're going to do a brief staff report just very quickly. Then we would like you to provide direction to staff on whether you're interested in finalizing this land use code amendment for adoption or whether you're going to provide us some alternative direction. I wanted to take a minute just to discuss the public notice and comment that occurred since this land use code amendment was initiated in April. This will be your third meeting on this topic. On April 10th, the land use code amendment was initiated, and you retained the authority to hold this public hearing. That's why we're here this evening. So your second meeting was on May 22nd, at which time you endorsed the scope of the amendment and the schedule and outreach. And tonight is the third, that's the public hearing. I just wanted to explain briefly the required public notice that was given for this land use code amendment, and then some enhanced notice that you suggested to us and development. So on June 29th, the staff report was issued, which you have in your packet materials tonight, and notice of the public hearing was given. That notice occurred as is required under the terms of the land use code in both the newspaper in the Seattle Times, and it was provided in the notice in the weekly permit bulletin, which is our materials that go out weekly that describe permits and city actions that are up for council consideration. The notice was also provided to the Washington State Department of Commerce, as is required by the state law under the Local Project Review Act and GMA. And then a notification of the code amendment was also provided to people who subscribed to the weekly permit bulletin. That included about 1,388 people. So in response to council feedback, we did also do enhanced notification. So we did create a code news website, and I would encourage you to go look at that. We've done that now for all the code amendments that are under consideration before the council. Each has their own webpage and describes the procedural history and background of each of these code amendments. That one was posted on June 1st. We did expand the distribution of the mailing in this case, so instead of just limiting it to the over 1,300 folks that are on that mailing list, we expanded it to include all the interested parties from the Energize Eastside project, as well as any other project that is a process 1 or is currently in process 1 or process 3 review. So that's anyone who might be interested in a conditional use permit or a planned unit development or other project that's currently in review with development services. We also held a courtesy public meeting at the East Bellevue Community Council. That was on June 6th. And on June 22nd, Matt and I held a courtesy public meeting here at City Hall to give a brief presentation and answer questions. We had a long Q&A period. We did hear just briefly, some of that's outlined in greater detail, and I'm sure you'll hear from the public on these topics as well. Issues with respect to the timing of this code amendment, the effective date, council's role in the broader permit review process, how the planning commission involvement should occur, and then public engagement. And we got some great feedback on public engagement, and actually have suggested some changes that we're going to make to our public outreach operational provisions. And we will be doing some additional targeted mailings for the 500-foot mailing with postcards as opposed to sending out the weekly permit bulletin, so people can see that a little bit better and understand the project that may be of interest to them because it's in the vicinity of their homes. And then we also will be using project fact sheets in more detail in the future. In project fact sheets in more detail, you will receive those in the past when you've had questions about particular projects, and an example of that is also in your packet materials. And then staff right now who worked on the website update earlier this year are also working on an interactive mapping of permit applications that will be an enhancement to the Development Services website that went up. So with that, I would like to just identify the question presented this evening for our public hearing, which is, should the City Council amend the land use code to remove quasi-judicial appeals to the City Council of hearing examiner decisions and recommendations of process 1 and 3 matters. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Matt, and he will briefly run through how the process flow would change if this amendment were to be adopted.
Thank you, Carol. Mr. Mayor, council members. So process 1 land use matters include conditional use permits, shoreline conditional use permits, preliminary subdivision approvals or plats, and planned unit developments. Under the current land use code, the hearing examiner issues a final decision on process 1 land use matters, and the hearing examiner's final decision is appealable to the City Council. Under the current land use code, hearing examiner process 1 decisions are final and do not require further City Council action in the absence of an appeal to Council. Under the proposed land use code, before the Council, with this public hearing tonight, Council would no longer adjudicate process 1 appeals. Instead, the appeals, if filed, would go directly to the Superior Court. Now, with respect to process 3 land use matters, these include all rezones, along with conditional use permits, plats, and planned unit developments proposed within the jurisdiction of the East Bellevue Community Council. Under the current land use code, the hearing examiner issues a recommendation, not a decision, to the City Council on process 3 land use matters. The Council considers the hearing examiner's recommendation and issues the final decision on process 3 land use matters, subject to EBCC approval for conditional use permits, plats, and planned unit developments within its jurisdiction. Under the current land use code and the proposed amendment, hearing examiner process 3 recommendations go to the City Council for a final decision, regardless of whether an appeal is filed. Under the current land use code, if an appeal is filed, then Council adjudicates the merits of that appeal contemporaneously with the City Council's final decision on the rezone or permit at issue. The proposed amendment would eliminate the quasi-judicial appeal to Council, although Council would remain the final decision maker, subject to the EBCC's approval or disapproval authority for land use decisions within the EBCC's jurisdiction. As outlined in the staff report, there are a number of benefits that are included with this potential process amendment. The first concerns Council's primary role as legislators. When Council hears a quasi-judicial appeal, it is required to act as a judge. Council must review all of the evidence in the record and then issue a written decision that's supported by the controlling legal authority. Under the proposed land use code amendment, Council would retain its primary legislative role to adopt comprehensive plan policies and development regulations to achieve the community vision, but it would no longer adjudicate land use appeals. With respect to the hearing examiner's role, it is first very important to remember that Council is not an advocate when it hears quasi-judicial appeals. Instead, it is required by law to conduct the proceeding and issue a decision that is fair, impartial, and unbiased. Quasi-judicial decisions based exclusively on public opinion rather than on an impartial examination of the record and an impartial application of the law to the evidence do not comply with the law and are susceptible to judicial challenge. For example, a quasi-judicial decision that does not correctly apply the law to the facts or is not supported by substantial evidence will be overturned by a reviewing court and a subsequent judicial challenge. In contrast to counsel, hearing examiners are trained land use experts who are impartial and objective decision makers. Hearing examiners are hired because of their background in land use and municipal adjudication, and they're trained to think like a judge, act like a judge, and issue decisions like a judge. They're not influenced by politics or election cycles, and this critical distance is crucial for quasi-judicial decision-making because bias, politics, and public opinion should not influence the final decision. An added benefit is that the amendment would allow council to communicate more freely with the public regarding Process 1 land use applications without the appearance of bias corrupting a future quasi-judicial decision by council on the permit application. In connection with Process 1 applications, with the Land Use Code Amendment, council could communicate with the public throughout the process without the risk of bias. In addition, consistent with the comprehensive plan policies that council has adopted pursuant to its legislative authority, the land use process would be improved when the quasi-judicial land use code amendment promotes objective decision-making by trained specialists, and this in turn promotes efficiency, reliability, and cost-effectiveness in the land use process. The proposed amendment would shorten the distance between the permit application and the approval or disapproval of the permit application, and it will also eliminate process. This is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan policies and is also consistent with state law addressing the efficiency of the land use process. Subsequent to the 1995 regulatory reform, many local jurisdictions throughout the state have increased authority to hearing examiners and removed their city councils from the quasi-judicial land use appeal process. The reasons given for the adoption of this process change have included increased city council access to the public during permit review, as I mentioned before, the avoidance of political influence or pressure in the land use process, and reduced city council exposure to liability, along with the aforementioned goal of efficient, predictable, and consistent land use decision-making. Just last month, the City of Redmond eliminated quasi-judicial appeals to its council for Type 1 and Type 2 permit applications, and Everett, Covington, Kirkland, Mercer Island, Shoreline, and Edmonds have all made comparable amendments to their land use code over the last few years. As part of council's comments during the previous two study sessions, along with the many comments that we received during the enhanced public notice period from the public, staff has looked at the number of appeals that council has heard since regulatory reform was undertaken in 1997. The number of Process 1 and 3 appeals to council totals 8. The number of appeals granted by council during this time period is 1. The number of appeals denied by council was 4, and the number of appeals remanded to the hearing examiner was 3. The processing time for council to consider an appeal varied greatly, with the longest time period being 21 months and the shortest being 2.25 months. Just for reference, the longest period was the Helistop revocation appeal, and the shortest one was the, I believe it's the Michaels Toyota appeal. And once again, just to briefly outline the upcoming public testimony, followed by a council Q&A. Staff will be present, Ms. Helen and I will be present the entire time, and direction to staff at the end of the public hearing. Thank you.
Can I ask just one clarifying question? You said you had eight decisions that came up on appeal. You listed 1 as 3 had remands, but those eventually came back to the council and were acted upon. A remand to the hearing examiner is simply to get another piece of information, correct? Generally speaking.
That's correct. The information that we received was based on available information from the hearing examiner's office. And you're exactly right, Deputy Mayor, that the council remanded the hearing examiner's decision back to the hearing examiner for further investigation or further hearing, and then it eventually came back to council for a final decision.
And I know 2 of these, and I would say the appeal was denied when it came back. And I'm trying to remember the third. One was, I believe, Torello, one was the helipad, and the third was, do you recall?
The open window school
I was
conditional
not on
use
the
permit.
council, but I believe that ended up, you know what, I can't remember exactly how that ended up. I wasn't on council at the time. So was that an appeal that was denied by the council eventually?
The council eventually denied the appeal, but granted the conditional use permit with additional conditions. And that was from the year 2000, and that case did eventually end up in the Superior Court as well.
Of those 8 appeals, do you happen to know how many of those appeals had the appellant have a legal counsel?
Okay. All but one, and anecdotally, I would suggest that in almost every public hearing that we have these days on a land use permit action, the parties are represented by attorneys.
And the one that didn't have legal counsel, one of the parties was a land use attorney, right? It's
That was the Michael's Toyota,
It-
and it
yes.
was your husband was the accountant.
Right. Well, I think we both were. We were our own legal counsel. Anyway, okay. Council denied that one, by the way.
I voted with you.
I know you did. Okay, thanks.
So one of the questions, the last appeals that we considered was on the east of the Lake Hills 148. Is that right?
There was actually no appeal of
Okay.
the 148 project.
Just once you run through the process on that, what happened?
On that project, there was a public, it was actually within the jurisdiction of the East Bellevue Community Council. There was a pre-decision public hearing that the council took final action on that proposal, and it was forwarded to the East Bellevue Community Council for their 60-day approval, disapproval jurisdiction. They exercised their jurisdiction and disapproved that project, and it was subsequently appealed to Superior Court and on to the Court of Appeals.
But the council approved the hearing examiner's decision.
That is correct.
Okay.
Recommendation.
Recommendation, yeah. Yep, ready.
I would move to open the public hearing.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Let's open the public hearing. Deputy Mayor Chomak will call the names of the speakers.
We have 24 people signed up at 3 minutes apiece. That's a little over 70 minutes. We're here. We'll extend the meeting. Well, we'll definitely have to extend the meeting. So as we get closer to 10 o'clock, I will do that. I'm going to call 3 names so you're ready. So I'm going to keep that 3-name roll going here. So don't, if you're sitting in the back and I call you up as number 3, work your way up to the front. It'll just help us expedite things. The first 3 names are Karen Morris, Pamela Johnson, and Steve Kasner.
Do you want me to start? 12 years ago, I participated in a land use ordinance process to try and address the concerns of my neighborhood and others.
Please speak up.
I'm sorry. We focused on the pragmatic aspects of the operations and regulations, not being lawyers or particularly savvy about city processes. We thought we had achieved some of what we proposed, but were concerned about the will of those involved to oversee and enforce. City officials, including some in planning and some council members, told us not to worry. When the problems we anticipated arose and we were unsuccessful at getting them addressed by permit holders or COB, we discovered some very surprising and disappointing things. This land use ordinance had been created as a process 5 and was at the time the only process 5 we could find. What that meant was that in the event we had issues or problems with something about a permit under this process, we had no appeal except filing a case in King County Superior Court. This was an expensive remedy that neighbors were highly unlikely to be able to use. The other entities involved, however, had no problem threatening to go to court and repeatedly refused to improve conditions that had logically led to the problems. It took us 9 long years of putting up with problems we had been promised would not occur, spending a lot of time developing our own documentation and communicating with COB staff to finally get at least some problems addressed. Others remain even after an attempted mediation. So I speak strongly against any proposal that takes away your citizens' ability to get problems and issues addressed within the structure of Bellevue City government. It is especially important that they can appeal to those who feel some impetus to actually listen to them and who have some understanding of the issues involved. I am afraid this proposal is part of a much larger pattern of separating decision makers farther and farther from direct contact with and accountability to those whom they work for or represent. This is a regional trend, and it is one I would hope that the city of Bellevue would resist. Many citizens of Bellevue are engaged and intelligent. We do not need staff or representatives to think for us, but rather with us. Please move in another direction on this, a direction which builds trust and moves us all forward together. Thank you.
Just a note in terms of time management, if you have something to hand out, hand it to the city clerk and go ahead and start. So.
And after Ms. Johnston, Steve Kasner and Todd Anderson.
Okay, Pamela Johnson, 3741 122nd Avenue Northeast, Bellevue, Washington, Bronx Hills Community Club. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Holland for doing work on the outreach process. That's one of the chief complaints that has been mine for a while, and you know, that's really great work to go forward on. I'm not going to go through all my issues on here, so I'll give you the paperwork. So I'll start with number 6. Proposals should have the ability to re-examine the hearing decision. If you look at number 6, it's from the Snohomish. And in Snohomish, they have grounds for seeking reconsideration to be limited to the following. Hearing examiner exceeded the hearing examiner's jurisdiction. The hearing examiner failed to follow the applicable procedure. Hearing examiner committed an error of the law. Hearing examiner findings, conclusions, or conditions were not supported by the record. Such things as these. Number 8. Proposal does not influence the council's ability to influence the final decisions. Even if the attorney examiner makes a decision on a development permit, the council can adapt an ordinance that allows them to reconsider the final decision. This could be the same as the ability to re-examine the hearing decision or a decision maker in the need to re-examine. Number 11, notice is not fairness. Notice does not necessarily prepare the public for the nature of the hearing. The proposal does not account for the different ways to do a project. It's different than just noticing about the project and what it means. Mitigation is not always fair, and a better way for all is the fair way to go. Number 12, proposal does not equals lower participation. Current notice results in an ineffective and inadequate public participation. Proposals removes a step in public participation rather than adds to it. More public participation is needed for the public to have interest, impact the project. I think what I'm trying to say here is that one of the things you guys are saying, let's do it earlier, but it's harder for the people like us, even with this thing here, to understand it at the very beginning. And I couldn't make all the decisions back in when it first came out, a new first thing, because I had to learn more about the process as it went along. So the same as when we get another project, you have to learn more about the project as it goes along. So earlier, yes, but you know, some of us can't be involved in this stuff for 3 years down the line when some of these projects are 3 years getting in the permit process. Narrowing participation. Prospective changes could affect the entire community. So some of these things they're saying, like, these are specific things, so they're quasi-judicial because they're specific things.
Excuse me, your time's up.
Time's up. Thank you.
Steve Gassner, Todd Anderson, and Josh Whitehead.
Mayor Stokes, members of council, for 25 years I've come to this podium in different buildings and spoke to council. I had a discussion with the city manager out of the stats you saw earlier this evening. 2% in all categories in this year. The public is incredibly unhappy with the transparency of the city. And if you look at past years, in East Bellevue, our numbers are pathetic with deciding whether things are happening. At the glacial speed at which things move through the city, the fact that we talked about this in April and we are going to make a decision in August is ridiculous. 2 of you will not be here, guaranteed, and up to half of the council could be turned over. I think this is a poor process for the public. Having made quasi-judicial decisions for the last 10 years, they are difficult. I was elected, you have been elected. We trust you to do the right thing. We don't know where these hearing examiners come from, who they are. We have an incredible legal staff in the city of Bellevue who gives you everything you need to know to make each of these decisions. 1 every 2 years is not unreasonable. And I have a little bit of question of the statistics because there were 2 decisions that council members, and I know Council Member Lee did both of them, Kimberly Park reversed the hearing examiner, and so did McTavish Highlands, which may have been before the 20-year window, I don't remember. But the idea that this council, during the summer, I mean, you're missing 1 member and you have 1 appearing by phone. This issue is way too big to be done on this incredible fast track of we must have a decision in August. Please don't do this. Please set it up, get more input, and let the new council in January, whoever those 7 people are, decide if we want to do this. I think it's a terrible idea. You've all worked hard on massive issues through the years, and please do not remove yourself from the most important shaping decisions that we will face as a city. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers.
Todd Anderson, Josh Whitehead, followed by Russ Paravecchio, it looks like.
Todd Anderson, 4419 138th Avenue Southeast. You can hear me. There's massive failure in the government at all levels, and tonight I'm in the phone book, Todd Anderson, SEN. You'll be able to look me up. I have some video that I'm going to show you of our esteemed lawyer, Carol Heelan, over there. So let's get to this land use code. Public comments have voiced concern that the city council, rather than, this is the words of that report, neutral hearing examiner. No such thing as a neutral hearing examiner. Hearing examiners work piecemeal. No work, no eat. Who hires the fair hearing examiner? The city does, of course. The hearing examiner is not, the city examiner's work is not to the city's liking. City examiner kind of disappears. What an amazing piece of work, this report. So elected officials can't be fair. According to harvardlaw.edu, 90% of judges are elected. So you're saying 90% of the legal work done in the United States is not fair? I bet the guy who cares most about this is this gentleman right here, Bellevue Chamber of Commerce. All right, so who wrote this report? Well, maybe Carol Heelan, a city attorney and employee who unbelievably violated multiple rules in the EIS process, particularly slapping a camera out of my hand at an open public EIS meeting on Energize East Side. She was caught on this video lying about why she wanted the video stopped.
Excuse me, this is not a place to...
It relates to the land use, sir. It relates to the
You
lease.
can talk about without disparaging an individual.
It's not. It's all on video. You'll get to see it.
That doesn't make it any better.
To enjoy their time here and to
Still
learn
disparaging
something.
an individual.
And so we welcome
And you're not
that
showing
Todd
that. Could you put it
and
down,
others
please?
make sense and other organizations.
Mayor Stokes,
We wanna
quit.
see it.
They want to see it.
We want to see it.
I'm going to play it over since you've wasted time, Stokes.
Be helpful
You
and
work for us, we want to see it.
with,
I know you want to steamroll this process,
I
Stokes.
want to just hear the facts and talk about
These are facts. These are facts.
actually Carol Helen.
Helen, I apologize.
So let me set this up since you've interrupted the flow. This is Carol Heelan preventing videotaping at the Energize East Side project. She does not want funding because she doesn't want on record the propaganda that her contractors and PSC contractors are telling the public. I have hours of this video. This is just 50 seconds. So if you allow me.
It's Carol Heelan. She is the
My
city
name is
attorney.
actually Carol Helen.
Helen, I apologize.
I represent the city of Bellevue, and we're here for all the public, and we want all the public to enjoy their time here and to learn something. And so we welcome that Todd and others from Sense and other organizations are here, and to the extent that we can all cooperate and be helpful, and we are not interfering with other people who are filming or who are
Other people are filming?
actually they aren't, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But you are, so it's
Yeah.
and it makes everyone nervous.
But it's a public event.
And I'm not,
And there's a lot of people who cannot be here, and this is a great way to provide that information to them. All right, good. So now that we've got it on record that we can videotape.
And what you're seeing is her slapping the camera out of my hand. The rest of the video is far more damning than this. I really hope that, and Ernie, you're not involved in this because this goes way before you.
Thank you, sir. I made sure that he got time added to him. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Josh, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering it here, Whiten?
That's perfect.
Is that okay? Followed by Russ, and I know I'm doing this one, Paravecchio, and then followed by this one I will get right, Brian Girdowski.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Josh Whited. I'm an attorney, and I represent Ainatata Uchi and Helicopters Unsafe here. I'm here today to voice strong opposition to eliminating appeals to City Council for Process 1 and Process 3 land use applications, especially with respect to conditional use permit applications, both generally and those relating to helistop specifically due to public safety concerns. We respectfully request that the city reconsider this proposed amendment. In watching today's presentation, I think the proof is in the pudding to a degree, even if you accept the city's stats on those conditional use permit appeals or the appeals that have gone to council, 1 every 2.5 years, 8 over 20 years. That's not too much for the council to do as a starting point. Second, half of those, based on those stats, resulted in either a change in the decision or a remand that likely resulted in additional conditions and certainly resulted in additional fact-finding that the city council thought was necessary. Conditional uses are just that. They're conditional. They're not permitted outright. They're not prohibited outright. The city has wide discretion with regard to the conditions that it imposes on the conditional use permits. It can impose conditions to ensure compatibility with other uses, to protect public health and safety, and to ensure that the conditional uses are not detrimental to nearby uses or property in the immediate vicinity. It can limit hours of operation, intensity of operation. It can impose mitigation conditions with regard to traffic impacts. It can impose conditions to protect public health and safety. And those are all important things that the city council has a role in and should be involved in. The city council serves as an important check on city staff who interact with the same permit applicants day after day, year after year. And the city council acts as an important check on the hearing examiner, who is but one person, who is not elected nor accountable in the same way the city council is. And often, the city council is in the best position to know what the city council intended when it adopted specific code amendments. The city council is in a better position to make those determinations than a hearing examiner or city staff. Conditional uses and the conditions imposed on them also impact future development throughout the city of Bellevue. Once a conditional use goes in, that changes the dynamic of the neighborhood, and that the uses in that neighborhood are then looked at in the future planning and future development and future conditional uses. The conditions imposed also inform future conditional use permits because the conditions imposed there are looked to on future applications that are analogous. Respectfully, we would ask that you reconsider this proposed amendment. Once every 2.5 years is not too much to be asked to do. The decisions are important, they involve public health and safety. And finally, if you do approve the amendment, it should be clear that it does not apply to applications already deemed complete or to applications that previously went before the council on a conditional use permit field. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Russ Barbecchio. I practiced anesthesiology here for 43 years. I live at 2495 158th Place, Northeast Bellevue. It would be consummately unacceptable to allow a change in the system which would decrease the number of steps, undermine the current procedural requirements, or especially anything which would eliminate public input to the land use permitting process. Nor should we be forced to raise funds to go to court to be heard. I'm sure you'll recall how seemingly nice people came before us to ask if they could simply start a conversation to adopt their land use issues. Now it seems we might not even get to be a part of such conversations. We know there are those who would believe we are obstacles to be eliminated so that the disfiguring plans of certain developers can be railroaded through. The financial and power trappings at play would certainly favor a Goliath rather than a David if the current proposal were to be adopted. But the opinions and concerns of the people who built this community count. To desecrate the current system, to disallow our input, would make the founding fathers roll over in their graves. Let me share something with you that appeared in the Sherwood Forest Nextdoor.com community letter. It's on Saturday. Also, please allow me to preface this with an apology since I cannot confirm its accuracy, but for what it is, it states that by city statute, a change as significant as the City Council proposing to excuse itself from making decisions on conditional use permits must be reviewed by the Planning Commission unless the City Council issues a statement of necessity. It goes on to say the Council bypassed the Planning Commission, claiming that they are, quote, too busy to fulfill their role. You can confirm with my beloved as well as my immediate neighbors that many is the day I get up at 3:30 a.m. in order to greet my first patient at 4:30 so I can have them safely anesthetized and prepared for surgery at 5. Many of those same days I don't get off till 5 p.m. Then after a pleasant drive through the Iron Triangle, I arrive home in time for a quick meal to organize my next day and get to bed by 9 o'clock so I can do it all over again. Now that's too busy. And I'm sure that I'm not alone in that regard. Many of us barely have time to review the building permit for the latest application, which may need to be countered. It's an incessant onslaught. So what do? How about establish a responsive government, elect representatives thereto who understand that one of their most important jobs is to protect us from an unending barrage of entities who would subvert the system for their interests, much to the detriment of the community. Allow me to emphasize that no one I know in this community thinks that it is not perhaps one of your most important and primary responsibilities to protect us from this kind of attack, and that you need to devote every minute of time necessary in order to carry out this task because of its importance. It is your place to understand the workings of government in ways that we cannot.
Sir, your time is up, please.
To do less would be a dereliction of duty.
Hoorah.
Thank you.
Brian Dudowski, followed by Don Marsh, and followed by Steve Fricky. Again, does the yellow light give 30 seconds or a minute?
1 minute.
So again, as you're looking at that, the yellow light lets you know that you have 1 minute left. Just would really ask if people try to concentrate on wrapping up when the red light comes on.
You know,
Mr. Dudowski.
you know, just a comment on that. When I would chair meetings, I always had a soft clock, and I found that it reduced tension in the room, and people didn't go along. They're pretty respectful, and so you might consider that. In any case, my name is Brian Durdowski. I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, for your public service. The most important thing that this ordinance will do is to disadvantage the disadvantaged. Only those neighborhoods with enough money to be able to go to Superior Court, and the minimum is about $75,000, and a realistic number is closer to $200,000. Only those neighborhoods will be able to get justice. They may be able to make input, they may be able to participate, but they will not get justice if the issues are contentious. Appeals to the council are affordable. They are democratic, and they enable local wisdom and compromise, which you represent because you're elected officials, to come to bear. It also is a balance between the power of the bureaucracy and the elected officials. That really is where the tug of war is, and the citizens know this. They don't know who's deciding their fate. They know you, they don't know how the bureaucracy works. And the bureaucracy has its own perspective on things. As some of you know, I had the pleasure of representing the city of Bellevue on the King County Council. It was also well known that my colleagues hated land use appeals. Probably one reason was because I was there, raising lots of questions. This issue came up periodically. The council members wanted to be left off the hook of having to vote on these land use decisions. And my work and efforts, I think, were significant in keeping them on the hook. Because first of all, I would call it the way it was. That land use is a hot potato, it is political, and land development and local government elections are driven by money from land developers. And so you are in a box. You want to get out of that box. The quickest way to do it is to punt it off to court. It's not the right thing to do. That may not be your motivations individually. I don't want to malign that. I'm just saying that there is a drive in institutions to get out from under that wedge. One of the best reasons that I usually won those arguments was that a good contested land use hearing in front of a council allows you to test your decisions that you're making and your planning and your regulations that you're putting together. Because there you see a real world application of the things you're voting on. And it seems to me that that is a very good reason for keeping this alive. I also want to point out that your ordinance makes no changes whatsoever to make it easier for the public or more effective for the public to participate. Simply getting notice does not necessarily mean that they're going to participate more fully. You are taking away one of the public's tools, and that is the ability to get to you in a low-cost hearing. You're taking that away, and you're not replacing it with anything.
Your time's up, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Again, thank you for the opportunity to address this. I'll offer additional comments in writing. I do hope that you let the Planning Commission weigh in on this. I think they have a right to look at it.
Thank you, sir. Your time.
Yes, you bet. Thank you.
Don Martin, followed by Steve Fricky, and then Randy, I believe it's Gad.
Good evening. Mr. Durdowski is a hard act to follow, but I'll maybe try to illustrate the principles that he was just talking about. So the proposal before us is complicated and it's not easy for the public to understand. So here's an allegory to illustrate how our system works today and how that would change if this proposal is adopted. Suppose a hearing examiner issues a decision regarding a complex permit. In approving the permit, the examiner implicitly accepts a questionable fact. At the bottom of page 389 in the 700-page record, it is stated that red is green. Under our current system, residents can tell council members about this error and the fallacious reasoning that stems from it. The residents can do this by appealing the hearing examiner's decision to the council and then explaining their objections. Red is not green. See page 389, they say. Council members notice the problem and reject the permit or remand it to the examiner for further clarification. The residents do not have to hire a lawyer, so the total out-of-pocket cost for them is zero. Let's see what happens under the new process. Residents have no legal way to communicate with council members, and the council members are busy and do not notice the problem at the